welcome to the session. Are you primary or secondary?
Primary.
Secondary. Oh, great. Pardon? Oh, brilliant. So, great, got a good range. So what I'm going to attempt to do, I'm Anne-Marie, and what I want to attempt to do this afternoon is just to give you a brief insight into the role of the Ed Psych, because I don't know whether you've yet come across one, and relate our job and what we do to the SEN Code of Practice, because I think it's a really important area. So I'll just give you a brief oversight of what EPs do and how we work, and then relate that to how that might impact on your work. Okay, so that seems an obvious question, but the reason I put that slide up there is to actually say what you would do. You are as much a psychology practitioner as I am, because you are the ones who are dealing with these issues day by day, and without the input from the staff in schools, we can't do our jobs. Okay, so if you look at what educational psychology is in particular, there's two references there, the BPS and the HCPC, basically saying we're working with children and young people, looking at what are the differences that are hindering their progress in education and in development. I've put that slide up, what do we do? And in the top right hand corner you can see what we don't do. When you say psychologist, that's the image everybody has. That's not to say we don't do therapeutic work, because we do some therapeutic work, but we work at lots of different levels. So we work directly with the young person, the child or the young person, from 0 to 25 years of age, so that will be taking in you as well. We work with their families, and we work with all the professionals that work around them. But we also have a statutory role to find the way and to sort of pilot the way through the process to get those children's needs met in the most appropriate way. Now, the thing about SEN is it is a litigious minefield, and it's something you really do need to be aware of. And that's why I'm not going to stick religiously to the slides because they are quite dull, but what they are for you later on to follow things up, and you will get people quoting legislation at you. So that's why I've included it this way. So just in case you fancied joining us in the profession, historically you can see that you used to need to have a psychology degree, a teaching qualification, 2 years teaching experience, and then you did a master's degree in educational psychology. Now, you still need the psychology degree, 2 years working. You don't need to have been a teacher, but you need to have worked with children or young people, and it's now a 3 years doctorate in educational psychology. I did a mixture of the two, in that I started out as a science teacher, so had to do a psychology degree while teaching, and then did the master's, and then did the doctorate whilst being an educational psychologist. So I'm a glutton for punishment, but we're always welcome to people joining our profession, and hopefully will enthuse you enough to think about it. So that's sort of a diagram that gives you a brief look at the sort of areas in which educational psychologists work in. I mean, you should imagine top left-hand corner with mental health, emotional literacy, that's an obvious one. We also do a lot of work with early years, so we'll get referrals from paediatricians, health visitors, speech and language therapists, and from parents. Obviously with SEN and learning, that's a clear one. We also do a lot of work around behaviour and exclusions. And the top right-hand corner is my specialisation. I work exclusively now with looked after children. So, what do? We take a very holistic approach, and we work, like I mentioned before, with the young person, with the carers, with the school, and with all the support services that are around the school. And what we're working to is looking at what are the strengths of that young person and what are their needs. What provision must we make and what interventions must we make to help them to access their education? And in so doing, we use tried and tested evidence-based psychological principles. So that's what we're doing. Like I mentioned before, we work at the individual, the group, the organisational, and we tend to work mainly with complex needs children and vulnerable groups, so such as the ones who have got EHC plans or statements, the ones at a risk of exclusion, and children who are in care. And that is a diagram there to give you an outlook at the sort of work that we do. So it's very, very varied, depending on where you work, with what your population's like. And as you can imagine, working in a community, working out in a rural setting is very different with working in an inner city area, looking at areas of deprivation, looking at all sorts of factors. The job is very, very varied. Okay? So what do? We act as consultants for schools, parents and anybody else that wants to hear. We carry out assessments. You may have seen an EP doing that in a school. We develop interventions and monitor those interventions in conjunction with teaching staff. So this is where you play a pivotal role. And we also write reports on the outcome of that. We also contribute to multi-agency meetings, so I might be at Alderhay Hospital sitting in a meeting with the inpatient team who are working with somebody who's been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and we're working maybe along with a social worker, maybe somebody from the school and the parents, working in how we're going to help that young person when they are discharged from hospital. Okay, and that, I should imagine that coming from the FE branch, you hit a fair amount of that. Okay, so here's the dreaded SEN code of practice, and it is worth having a quick dip through it just to be aware of what's expected of you. So it's statutory guidance, so this stuff has to be done. And it's for support of children and young people who have special educational needs or disabilities. And there's lots and lots of legislation which is associated with it. You can all read, so I don't need to go through it all. But be mindful that you will have people quoting bits of this at you if they decide that you are not doing enough for their child or young person. So it is worth being aware of those documents. They're all online and it's worth being aware of them. Who does this apply to? Well, as you can see, there's a lot of bodies who this applies to, including local authorities, governing bodies, academies, pupil referral units, independent schools, including free schools as well, early years providers, so all your childminders, all your nurseries, and the NHS is under this, youth offending teams and tribunals. So this is a very extensive, this goes in everywhere, and we really do need to follow what it says. There have been some changes from the last one, so now it's up to 25, from 0 to 25. It's now got an emphasis on disability as well as special needs, and there is a huge increase in the amount of participation from the young person themselves and their parents. Now that is both a blessing and a disguise, because clearly we want to hear what the young person has to say. The voice of the child or the young person is central to everything we do, and likewise their parents' view. But as we all know, that can sometimes be quite a difficult one to navigate as well. The other thing that's quite good, I think, is there is an emphasis on high aspirations for young people and improving the outcomes for them. There's huge now amounts of close partnerships between different organisations, obviously education, health and care, but we do work with all sorts of providers to try and find the right facilities and interventions for the young people we know. And there's a greater emphasis on this idea of local offer. So what have you got in your area? There isn't standard processes anymore. It's what is it we can do creatively to meet the needs of this young person? Who is in our area? Who could work with us? So it's at that level. And that's where, again, that local knowledge, that's you knowing the child, the young person, knowing the area, knowing what you've got. This is what is crucial, which is why you're absolutely at the heart of every piece of work that we do. I also want to emphasise the idea of the graduated approach, and this is where schools and educational institutions can come aground. They will identify a young person as having a problem, but they haven't followed the graduated approach. And this could actually happen more so to you in the FE system, that the child has got through school somehow, and then they come to higher education and nothing has gone on before. So you have to start at the beginning, and it's a really difficult patch, and people are always very resistant to this. It's clearly, can't you see that there is a problem here? It's evident for everyone to see, but if that process hasn't been followed, there isn't the evidence to show that the right interventions earlier on were put in place. We don't know what the context of this issue is, so it's really, really important that we follow that. So the EHC plan now replaces the statements, and there are children now with statements, but they're all in the process of being transferred into EHC plans. There is also a massive emphasis on that progression into adulthood and making provision for people to pass on, which I think is a very positive move. So there's relevant duties under the Equality Act and the Mental Capacity Act, and there's also the guidance on supporting young people who are in youth custody. So those are additional to what we've been doing so far. So the Code of Practice, who are these people with SEN? So the Code of Practice says a young child or a young person has, if they have a learning disability or a difficulty, where special educational provision has to be made, which is significantly greater than the majority of the other young people of the same age. Or they have a disability that prevents or hinders them, and it needs something over and above the kind of provision that you would make for the mainstream in your school. Now this looks very dry, but when you're arguing with somebody about what you would provide, what is reasonable, this sort of wording and the detail here is really, really important. Yeah? So what are there's 4 areas of special needs, and those are the ones that those are clearly identified as that they come under. And they, as I mentioned, the graduated approach, yeah?
If a child comes from, say, another country, and the EAL child, would the language barrier be classed as an SEN?
Not necessarily, no. Very good question, but not necessarily, because it could be that you've got enough support in your school that they can access their education, and actually you as a school should be providing EAL support in the school. Yeah. So another language isn't a special educational need. But working the other way as well is if the child has got a language problem, then you need to be mindful that they may have a language problem, which is again why you need the parents and the community, because I've often had to deal with a child with another language, and the only way I can know is by speaking to the parent or the carer or the teacher that can speak that language. So that's why it's a very collaborative process, really important what people are noticing. But it's all about degree and what else has been going on, because the other thing is, if somebody hasn't been to school because where they've come from, there's been no schools, clearly they're not going to be up to the same level as everybody else, are they? So again, it's that idea of context. What is this person's story? Yeah? So we need to do an assessing, we need to plan some interventions for them, get them done, and then review. Are they working? And we're looking at medium to long-term outcomes. So it's a continuous process of data collection. And this is where schools and colleges can come unstuck, because they're doing the work, but they don't necessarily write it all down. That very complicated diagram really summarises the work that we do, and it's just basically saying we start at the middle with the question or the problem, and then we define what the problem is, we look at suitable interventions, we analyse the data, we form hypotheses, we test the hypotheses, and then we either resolve the problem or we start again, and we keep going on with that circle until we find a way forward that's helpful for everyone. But it's also within the framework of ethics, equality of opportunity, the political framework that we're working in, and the values that we have. Hopefully we have shared values. So I think that although it's complex, it's quite a nice summary of how we work. So basically what we're saying then, and the way that the graduated response works, is that for 80% of the children and young people that come in through your care, you should be able to meet their needs by the standard first top quality teaching. So 80% of them, and that's through differentiation and all the stuff that you do as a standard process. And if you've done that, and you've done your differentiation, and you might have done a bit of sort of, using a few visuals, and you might have done a bit of one-to-one, you might have allowed the child to access things that you've got in your institution, you might think, something, still not getting, there's still a problem here. So at that point, you need to look at the information that you've gathered on the child. And I always say as well, please, 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 when you do lovely interventions, make sure that you note the outcomes down, because quite often I'll get, we've done this, we've done that, we've done the other, and I'm going, well done, but what happened? Yeah, so if you don't put what has happened, it will all go back. And that's how you end up with requests for extra support being turned down. And so the data that you use should be the high quality assessments that you're using. It should be, the proper assessment tools that you use. So everything's formalised and everybody understands where we're up to. So if after doing that 80% and you've still got nowhere, you then need to think, right, we need to be doing something different. Me and the Senko and the parent are going to sit down with all my data that I've collected on this young person and all the work that I've done with them and all the differentiation and what's happened. And remember, that could be things like attainment levels, it might be behavioural observations, it could be attendance, it could be their ability to, something like physical abilities, it could be, sort of final gross motor skills, that sort of thing, speech and language problems. You would then sit down with the parent and you would write a plan for the young person. And again, that's outlined in the SEN code, that's what you must do, and you have a duty to provide that provision for that young person. There is that it states it. And like I say, you're working with the parents or the carers and the young person to create their support plan. That should be agreed by everybody, and that's really important, because somewhere down the line, if the parent says, well, I didn't agree to that, then you're in tribunal. You also need to write what you expect the impact is going to be of whatever it is that you're doing, and you also need to review that. So it's no good saying, right, we've done it now, that's it, and then a year later, yeah, we want some more help. It's, well, when did you review it? Did you modify it? So these are living documents. They're not just in a filing cabinet, slammed away, forgotten. They are living documents. If you've done all that and still there's no problem, the child is making less than expected progress despite that report, all the evidence-based support and all the interventions, you're going to need to move them to stage 2. And that involves not only more frequent review, it also you need outside agencies to come and help. And this is the stage when we would come in. So you've also got a list there of the people or services that you might access at that point. Now, having said that, in reality, you probably know by now that if you refer someone to CAMS, we're looking at 6 to 18 months before they can be seen. It depends on where you are. Some places are much faster than others. Where I am, it's 6 to 18 months. You've also got things like speech and language, again, often have a massive waiting list. Occupational therapists, waiting list. GPs will often say, this isn't a medical problem, this is education. Which takes you right back to the point I made at the start, is you are our partners. Without you, we can't do this. So there's no magic place where we can take some of these children. This is what happens in school. And if we're using the developmental model, which is what we're doing, that is what you're working to as well. You're working at trying to help children and young people develop in the ways that they need to maximise their potential. So you might then be able to access some of these people and get help in the form of equipment, resources, specialist support, strategies, all the rest of it, and keep that cycle of plan, do, review going on and going on. And in some cases, in lots of cases, that's good enough. Those children are maintained, that's fine, and it works for them. Even with very extremes, you might have somebody who's right on the autistic spectrum who doesn't need an EHC plan because everything's fine and they're working, they're accessing their education and they're making progress. However, if that is not the case and the problem is more complex, with usually one or more areas of need, then we need to take it further, looking at the EHC plan. And that's when the severity of the problem indicates that the local authority is going to have to put in some more funding. And it's likely to be over a greater length of time as well. Now I've put here then the request for the EHC can come from the setting, so it could be the school, the institution, the nursery or whatever, or it could come from the parents. And I've put that it's there when there is a perception that SEN provision currently being made isn't adequate. And I've said that perception because depending on where you are, different people's perceptions will vary. So what you might think is a special need in the middle of Manchester is going to be very different from maybe somewhere out in rural Cheshire. You're also going to get some parents who, my child has got a problem, you're not doing anything about them, and they're on the phone day in, day out, what have you done? That's why you've got to have this paperwork up to date, because you then got very, very clearly, this is what we did, this is where the child's at, this is where we have measured them, this is what we've done, this is how often, and these are the outcomes. The parent's perception, though, could be, my child needs a plan, they need a plan for whatever reasons. In some cases, the parent's right that schools have done nothing. I go in sometimes and you think, what? And they've done nothing. In other cases, it's the opposite. So it's about knowing why and being able to back up why you've made certain decisions and having it all written down very clearly. Okay? When that happens, we need to consider the circumstances, and like I mentioned before, what is the story of the child? Where are they living? What is going on for them? Because it could be that that child is just not that bright, for want of a better word. It could be that they are. The fact that they're not up there doesn't mean they've got special educational need. It just means that they're not that bright, which doesn't sit well with some parents. Yeah? So not everybody needs them. The evidence provided that when you apply for an EHC, they need to see how you have been using the support, how it's been targeted, how much it's cost, and what effect what you've done so far, and also what else do you need. So this is what we've done so far. This is how much it's cost us. This is what we need, this is why we need the plan to do this. And bearing in mind, if you do need somebody to go out to a specialist placement because they can't manage in a mainstream placement, they have to have an EHC plan. So that's where that information is really, really important. So, like we've just said before, they're not making progress and it's long-term support. What do we need when we do the assessment? We need information from the young person, we need information from the parents, and we need from everybody, including yourself, about what they need. Most importantly, you need the psychology information. And what we do is we go around everybody, we do our own testing. What do we do in that? Is we observe the child in the setting, we discuss with you, parents and anybody else involved, and we look at the curriculum, we look at all that lovely work you've been doing at levels 1 and 2. So, assessment over time, which is basically what happens at stage 2. And then we do what we traditionally are known for, which is to sit down with the assessments with the child and do all the cognitive scores, where we actually get normative standardised scores which can say this child is performing much less or their behaviour is beyond where we expect it to be. So at this point, that's a very quick tour. Have you got any questions? No? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll have a job of working on a case together. Okay, so this is a year 3 child, so sorry about this, it's not an FE version, but you can see the same principles. So this is typically the sort of thing that might land on my desk or might be presented to me. So we have got that Tom is a Year 3 pupil whose behaviour is causing concern for staff in his school. He is described as finding it difficult to concentrate in class, and he frequently interrupts others. He rarely completes his work, and when he does, it is messy and untidy. He's got no close friends in his class. He often falls out with his only friend if they sit next to each other. And Tom finds writing and reading difficult and is reading books at a lower level than most of other children in his class. The teaching assistant who is employed to help a child with an EHC plan often helps Tom in a small group, including the child, Tom and his best friend, and another pupil with SEN. The TA has difficulty in keeping Tom on task, even in this small group, and Tom is often in trouble at playtime because he interrupts other children's games. Tom lives at home with his mum and his younger brother aged 2 years. His father lives with his paternal grandparents, and Tom sees him every weekend. He is often excitable on Fridays, and his teacher reports that he is tired on the following Monday. Tom's attendance at school is good, although he is frequently late and forgets his PE kit, reading book or dinner money. So that's Tom. And what we've got to do now, with really no idea what the problem is use this diagram to try and pick out the factors that might affect Tom. So just before we do that, can we establish which level of the SEM code of practice is Tom at currently? So is it stage 1, 2 or EHC?
I think it's EHC.
He might need one at the moment, but currently...
Anything put in place.
Pardon?
We don't know that he's had anything put in place.
We don't know anything, do we? We don't know. And looking at the data that we've got here, the school have just put him on in a small group. So he's at stage 2. He's at stage 2, but he could well end up needing an EHC. But at the moment, we've got to work out why we think that. So, looking at this diagram, what would we say are the issues then? What are the issues that stand out for you?
The first one I put along the line is behaviour.
Okay.
And it's difficulty to concentrate in class.
So difficulties in concentrating, yeah?
I put that down to what I thought in my head might be to do with nutrition.
So he could...
Is he eating breakfast before he comes?
Good question. That's a question to put up there, yeah? So what else is going on for him?
He's probably not getting much sleep.
So sleep is a problem. So we'll put here sleep with a question mark.
The other one, he has no close friends.
No close friends. Yeah.
And he often falls out with the one or the friend he has. I'm just thinking whether that's a learned behaviour or is it an actual cause for concern.
And that's what we don't know, because at this point, all of this, he might be on the autistic spectrum.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
We don't know. But the other point is that what I'm picking out here, we've also got the idea here is rarely completing work. He's got poor organisation. And the question I would ask there is memory. Are the memory issues? He's got poor reading, writing skills. And the other point I would pick out is as well, his work is messy. So is there something to do with coordination. Okay, and we've said that he's often, his behaviour is tired, so we've queried sleep up here. He interrupts others. So there's poor social skill there. He lives with a 2-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I've put it, he's from a broken home, so mum and dad don't live together. Mum might be focusing more on the 2-year-old, and he might be marginalised.
Perfect, yeah. So let's question attachment. Yeah. And
it may be that he was attached to his father, and because he's excited on Fridays, and he's tired on the following Monday, so dad might do a lot with him on the weekend. And he just can't wait to see dad on the weekend, that's why he plays up all week.
okay. So that's one of the emotions that we've picked up is excitement. Yeah, that's good. Keep it coming.
If mum and dad don't get on, that could have an effect on his social skills, because if all he ever sees is people rowing, and if that's how they deal with their problems by shouting.
So
That's
lovely
learned
one.
behaviour.
So learned behaviour, going back to your point as well. So learned behaviour. And also, what's that going to make him feel like, seeing somebody arguing?
Scared.
Very much intimidated, so he has to kind of, to protect himself, the animal instinct comes out and he kicks off.
Yeah. So some of the behaviour might be due to false bravado. Yeah. Controlling behaviour. Yeah. What else do we picked out?
I've put for the teaching assistant. The teaching assistant is employed to help the child with EHC. So teaching assistant might be just helping Tom. We don't know how much she's helping Tom. It might be a little bit, it might be a lot, but she's actually there to focus on the kid with the EHC plan. And if Tom doesn't have one, he's just getting a backlog of help from the other kid.
Yeah. How much help is he getting?
How much help?
That's an
And-
issue in my class at the minute. We have a boy with autism, and he has an SSA, but the SSA is supposed to work with the boy with autism and another boy as well.
Yeah.
And the boy that doesn't have autism is getting sort of left behind because the one with autism is so constantly demanding that all the TA's attention is focused on him. And then, so if that's a similar thing for Tom, if the other child is getting all the attention.
And that's reinforcing what might be going on at home. Because what's going on at home could be that that little 2-year-old is cute and cuddly and gets all the attention and the love. And also 2-year-olds are awful, aren't they? They come in and spoil everything. You're playing with your Lego and the 2-year-old comes along and kicks it all over or takes your stuff, and he's always a cute little boy and you're the one that's in trouble because you're the big boy. If that's going on, how do you feel? What else do you feel? You're feeling excited at seeing Dad, scared, intimidated. What else might you feel?
Lonely.
Lonely and angry. I'd be very angry.
Yeah.
Angry. Frustrated. But you might be very frustrated as well, because if you're not good at reading and you've got a specific learning difficulty with reading, you don't know why it is. You can't do what everybody else in the class is doing. So that adds to the feelings of low self-esteem.
And if he has like underlying speech and language issues,
Brilliant.
if you can't actually say to someone, I don't like, you know, the way my mum and dad treat each other, or I don't like that I can't do things in class, and you can't say that to anyone.
Perfect. That's a brilliant point, because speech and language is massive. And if he hasn't got good speech and language issues, then he can't articulate what his problems are. He can't even articulate how he feels.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do with him?
Love it.
Nice answer, we do, that's what he needs. So how are we going to get that love for him?
But everyone that's around him that's working with him.
Brilliant. So we get a meeting, so we get everyone around him together. Perfect. That's the first thing we do. And we say, right, what's going on at home? What time does he go to bed? Does he go to bed at the same time in the week as he does at the weekends? Why is he tired on a Monday? On a Friday, he's really excitable and probably hard to control. So what can we do to slow that down? Or how can we harness that excitement to make it work for him rather than against him? What next are we going to do?
Maybe get him assessed by speech and language.
So assessed by speech and language, yes, we refer to them. You might get the EP to do a cognitive assessment. And that's not because we don't believe you. Because if you tell me he's got problems with his writing and his reading, I believe you. What I might do is look at other things around it there. I might be looking at metacognitive skills, I might be looking at memory, because we've said here he forgets his stuff, he never takes his stuff. Is that because the adults around him are either doing it all for him or not doing it any at all?
Yeah.
Because if mum's really busy with a 2-year-old, she's either going to do it all for him or expect it to do it for himself. So is he getting amount of support at home?
Yeah.
Is he resentful because he's being asked to look after his younger brother?
Yeah. Or does his mum work full time?
Does his mum work so
And she's never home, and or the 2-year-old's in like with a childminder or in nursery as well.
So what support does he get at home? How consistent is this? Okay. Anything else we can think of?
I thought raise his self-esteem.
Yeah. So so we're looking at work with self-esteem. So what might you do with that? Your Tom, what would you like?
Focus on the things that he can do good and work on them, and then bring his weaknesses in as problems that he can solve.
You're brilliant.
Something that one of my placement schools did, they had a nurture group. So children with low self-esteem had a little group where they got together, really small group,
I haven't seen that.
and they'd build it up from having 1-to-1 to having 2-to-2, and just build up more children in the little nurture group and just find nice things to say about each other and do lots of team building activities and just developing relationships.
Fabulous, and I think Tom would be great in a nurture group. So we haven't exhausted Tom by any means, but what we've done is we've got a good place to start, haven't we? And I think the other point we can do is by getting everybody together in the room, we can't have different stories being to different people. So, Dad says, yeah, he goes to bed at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and actually Mum knows that he's going to bed at 11:30 and watching telly on his own until the morning. So we can see, and this is only a hypothesis, so this is our first meeting, so you can see how the process works. So what we would do is I would bring my data to the meeting, you would bring your data to the meeting, and then we'd come up with a plan, and we'd say, okay, Mum and Dad, we want you to develop some rules between you. We want to make sure that at home you put up lists of his gear that he needs every night in his bedroom, and somebody goes through it with him every day. At school, we're going to let him go to the nurture group, and maybe we're going to have him play with one other child with an adult to facilitate it. Because maybe he doesn't know how to share, he doesn't know how to turn take, he doesn't know how to ask another child to play properly. So we're going to have to teach him. And we're going to do that problem solving, which is a lovely idea, and also let's build on the things he is good at, because there's no mention, is there, of what he's good at, and he's going to be good at something, even if it's running. You know, he could be doing something very physical, and the fact that he can't sit still gives us an indication of here's somebody with a lot of energy to build up, so could we give him something that uses a lot of energy to do? And that will build his self-esteem up, and he will get praise for that, and at the same time will address his learning issue. Does that make sense?
Very much so, yeah.
And that, again, you could apply that, and I do apply that to FE, because the problems, they'll look slightly different, but it's the same underlying principle.
Yeah.
You know.
I work in a special needs school.
Oh, right.
So I come across a lot of this every single day.
Brilliant.
Whereas the other thing we've come across as well is cultural differences.
Yeah.
Within the SEN field, especially parents of an Asian, Pakistani, Indian background like myself, not knowing what's out there for the child.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily mum and dad might be from a rural setting in India
Mm-hmm.
or Pakistan. They are not sure or probably scared about the authorities taking the child away, whereas they know that they're there to help, not take the child in placement care.
Brilliant point. Absolutely, which is essential to get them all together.
Yeah.
Because it's a two-way process, isn't it? And that's why we need to review it as well, because we need to clarify things for parents and carers. We need to explain what's going on, but we also need to know what's going on in the home. So, you know, there could be a problem with the fact that nobody at home can read. So the child isn't getting any reading because there's nobody reading a story to them at night. There's no text in the house. It doesn't matter what language you're reading in. If you're not reading at all, and because nobody can read, then you're not going to be good at reading.
That's a big problem for my children, I think, because I'm in a mainstream school, just a year 2 class.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, even just for, you know, children who probably haven't got a special educational need, but they are just challenging children,
Mm-hmm.
I think this could be really helpful just for finding a way into them.
And that it is worth, because particularly with behaviour as well, because behaviour is a difficult one, you know, because it hurts us so much, doesn't it, when you're working with children who are so challenging and rejecting and violent in some cases. But actually, if we spend some time picking up the triggers, and often it's just a practicality. I always remember working with a young man who, the school, he was at a pupil referral unit, and they were saying, well, he kept saying, I want to do an apprenticeship in a garage. And they went, well, you had an apprenticeship, but you didn't bother going. It was work experience. You didn't bother going. You didn't work. And when we unpicked it with him, he was on very heavy antipsychotic medication, and he couldn't get up to go, and he had to be there for 7 o'clock. But he was also frightened to walk down the street because he kept, you know, he was paranoid. So when somebody got him a place that he could start at 8:30, and they got him some transport there, he was a model student. But prior to that, he sat in his bedroom and didn't go out because he was frightened. And it was as simple as that. And in going and being able to access it, his mental health improved, his socialising improved. So, any comments? Because I think we're just about out of time. But any comments, reflections?
I think it's been really useful.
It's been helpful.
I think it has.
Yeah.
I think all the young teachers should have come to this one as well. Rather than
Well, it's nice to see you, folks.
Because there's one on behaviour, isn't there, on challenging behaviour, but I think this is interesting because it's what's underneath the behaviour, what's causing the behaviour, rather than just how to deal with it.
Well, that's the point. I mean, that's not to say they don't have a role, but you could find yourself, as in the authority I've just left, where there wasn't a behaviour support team. So you couldn't call the cavalry and say, we've got a problem. You'd have to deal with it, with me. And that's why I'm saying that psychology isn't just the ownership of the psychologist. The psychology is you. And if there is a mental health strategy comes out, you will be delivering it. You might be the only people who are the stable, safe place to be. And some of the behaviours that you're watching, and as I say again, adults talk through problems, children act them out because they haven't got, particularly if you haven't got the language, either through a different language or you haven't got any speech and language skills or not good enough. So, well, thank you for coming.
Pleasure, thank you.
It's been a pleasure to have you. I think it's been a nice select group.